they stopped researching the effects of ultrasound on a human fetus in 1993. So this is an important thing to consider. Just because the technician understands that ultrasounds might potentially cause harm doesn't mean they know how to actually use ultrasound as well. So you have to make sure that you have a very educated and conscious technician. You can't just leave the ultrasound stick or whatever Doppler you want to call it on the fetus or on the womb for long periods of time. Just another thing that centralized medicine has failed with. I mean, it's absolutely absurd because it's hard for me to actually find one or two things that centralized medicine is flawless in.
This is Decentralized Radio. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Ryan.
The goal of this podcast is to help educate you on how to live your most optimal life. We will host industry expert guests to shed light on topics that matter.
We are not gurus, rather two individuals who have had to pave their own path to health and vitality, independent of the centralized systems that plague modern society. Welcome back, boys and girls, men and women, to Decentralized Radio. Today we're having another part two, actually. We're talking to Zaid, a good friend of ours, has his own podcast, the 2 a.m. podcast. Really good stuff. Posts a lot of really, really good threads, just like Tristan over here, who also posts a lot of good threads. I don't even try because it's like, they got the thread thing covered. I'm just going to stay in my lane. But I love reading them, and I always get hyped. I read them. I go tell everyone about them. No one understands what I'm saying, but I still yell at them anyways because I want them to get it. I'm trying to knock at the door of curiosity. And that's what I love about both of you guys, really, before I ramble on too long, is that when we talked to Zaid last, many moons ago, it was one of our earliest podcasts. And I've seen so much growth in all of our mindsets since then. And what I love about people like you and Tristan here is that you're not afraid to be wrong. You're not afraid to be curious, and you're always seeking out new knowledge. And I think that that's very valuable. There's no dogma. And so that's why I wanted Zaid back on, because there's just so much more new things to talk about since last time we talked. Oh, sorry there. I was just saying there's so much new stuff to dive into since last time we talked. But Tristan, how you doing down under?
Oh, it's good, man. It's 7 a.m. Sun's been out for an hour and a half, 2 hours, which is cool. Early sunrises, big fan of that. Beach has been nice when we got in there, but damn, it is hot.
Did you get skin cancer yet?
Yeah, no, not yet. But it's pretty crazy how just watching the sunrise and really being out in that morning sun has prevented me from getting. So I haven't gotten sunburned once. And the UV was as high as like 13 compared to when I was in Wyoming. It was like 4. So it's cool. It shows that this stuff works, as well as the fact that I know I'm not built to be in the heat for 12 months out of the year. I can tell you that much. But it's great to get some local seasonal produce and sunshine in.
Yeah. Is 13 the highest, by the way, it goes to?
No, I was in Costa Rica before, and it was like 14 or 15. I think 15 might be the highest. I don't even know. Some metrics that actually just have like a 13 plus thing. So it's just like, okay, whatever it is after that. And that's interesting as well. And it might depend on where you are in terms of just the atmosphere, because a lot of the UV gets eaten up in the ionosphere and then the ozone layer as well. When there was like a hole in the ozone, there was way higher UV coming through, which you could maybe argue that might have been a good thing for some places.
Or some people, yeah. Because I know right now, I think our peak is still 3, and you have like maybe 45 minutes of it, and then it goes down to 2. And then, but every day that's nice, I'm trying to get out as much as possible, work on the cold. And that's something we can get into later in the podcast, just about embracing seasonality a little bit. And sort of just like when it gets cold, embrace the cold, feel the cold, go out in the cold, don't try to avoid the cold, all that kind of stuff. Because I think that's what keeps your mitochondria strong throughout the winter. And especially depending on haplotype and stuff like that, and how tightly coupled your mitochondria are and stuff like that. And plus, I mean, just the environment you're in right now dictates a lot of those things as well. So it's super interesting. And those are all the things that you've been writing about, everybody. And it's like keeps blowing my mind. Even though I know some of the things innately, when I reread them, it blows my mind a secondary time. But before we get into that, Zaid, you are a brand new father. So I want to congratulate you on that adventure for the next 18 years, and then the adult phase, as I call it, after that. But tell us about a little bit of your journey, because you went from an unconventional way, more of a holistic route with your guys' birth. And so it was not free of error or adventure. And I'd love for you to sort of tell us about that journey.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, by the way. It's quite a journey, just being introduced to fatherhood I'm gonna turn 27 in January, so I'm still relatively young compared to how most, I guess the average parent these days, especially with Western society and all of these other belief systems. But it's been amazing so far. I was never going to go down the route of conventional birth, let's say, in the sense of just, automatically checking into the hospital, not really focusing on prenatal care, not having a midwife. So off the bat, we were grateful to have, my fiance's aunt is one of the best midwives in the nation, Lisa Marie Oxenham. And she's also, it's actually a midwife couple. So Lisa Marie Oxenham and Richard Oxenham, and they've done collectively probably well over almost 800 births, 1,000 births. So they're definitely veterans in their field. And I just appreciate how much intention and how holistic these individuals approach birth, because I don't think we get that from the conventional system. We certainly don't get that from centralized medicine and in most doctors. And so, really just valuing the holistic and more comprehensive approach to birth is really been big for me. And I don't think I could have gone down any other route.
So what were some of the challenges that you guys faced along the way? It's actually, I'd love to know just more in depth of like what that process is like. I'm not a father. I know Tristan's not a father yet. But what does that entail? Because I know you had like you said, a midwife and stuff like that. Like, what is that process? What do you look for instance, when you're trying to find a midwife? If you want to go down that route, you don't want to be in a hospital setting. What do you think about things like doing ultrasounds and all these things? I know Stephen Lubka has been making some posts about that, who's been on guest on the podcast. I'd love just to dive down that rabbit hole a little bit with you.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at a whole bunch of things. I think most importantly, you have to look at the midwife's experience. So how many actual births has this person gone to? I think in the initial stages, you have to take a look at how they speak about the birth process in general, because from my perspective, I honestly think a midwife is a wizard. I think they're able to do things that most conventional MDs cannot, most conventional OBs cannot. And so I think it's more intuitive. When you come across a great midwife, you just know that they have come to show up, they've come prepared, and most importantly, they have the experience. So, we can dive into like prenatal care, everything from the nutrition approach to the light approach.
I think that'd be awesome, because I think all that's critical for development. And then also we can talk about a little bit how we carry those things post-birth as well, especially around light exposure and things like that, because I know some people say like, don't put your baby in the sun, like all this type of stuff. So I'd love to know sort of your angle on that and what you guys have been doing as well.
Yeah. So we've really, I think throughout the whole process, we've really been focused on beef liver pills. Like those things have been an absolute godsend, especially because my fiance runs a little bit anemic. So we went through all the blood testing. We went through everything that was required to make sure that everything was in check. But I think beef liver pills are something that's highly underexplored for pregnant women, especially the year leading up to the pregnancy, because oftentimes the woman needs that type of nutrition. The placenta needs that. The baby needs that, because it's all a feedback mechanism. And essentially, if you're not getting nutrition and you're feeding yourself the conventional Western food that most pregnant women are, then you're going to run into some serious problems, especially when you get into like renal tube defects and B12 and a whole bunch of other stuff. But outside of that, like, what do you guys want me to focus on more specifically? Because it's quite a broad topic. I don't want to get too overwhelmed with trying to pick something out.
Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. If you really enjoy this podcast, it would be really appreciated if you left us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or subscribe to our content on YouTube. This helps us get to a larger reach and a larger audience to spread this wonderful free education.
Yeah, because I think for me, actually, I'm most interested in sort of one, during pregnancy, how do we make sure that we're giving the child the best developmental chances and advantages? Obviously, nutrition is part of that. I think that's hyper focused on. Like, I don't like, for instance, we could talk like 10 seconds on like, what do you think about generic prenatal vitamins, for instance? You know what I mean? Probably the answer is they're crap. But I think that's an interesting point you made about the beef liver supplementation. And this kind of ties back into our discussion we had in our very first podcast that I would point to about smart supplementation versus just blindly throwing supplements at something because you hear they're good. You did a workup and you decided based on history, this is a good idea. You know what I mean? And so, while I think you're right, it's probably a good overall point of view, supplementation is sort of an art form in and of itself. And so it deserves that care and not just throwing things at something, especially when you're trying to, grow a child, you know what I mean? And protect it. I'd love to even think about things like, and this is kind of getting into the realm of edge of our knowledge base, but I think about things like raising or growing a fetus in a highly NEMF environment in your house. Like, how did you guys think about that, for instance, around care? And then I think light would be kind of cool too, because I'm always jazzed about light.
I think ultimately, like, it always comes down to the basics. So, for example, of course, spring water, nutrition, beef liver pills, sunlight, these are all things that we've definitely pushed for. And I think we need to understand that the human body already understands how to go about this entire process. So it's more so about keeping yourself protected from these sort of toxins or detrimental things such as non-native EMF. You have, toxic shower products. You have the municipal water. So it's more so about keeping yourself protected from all that stuff and just letting the body go through its natural process, because I'll be completely honest, like, we didn't have everything perfect, but we were 85 to 90% of the way there. And I really do think that a large part of that is light. Like, I've gone to a little bit of Cruz's perspective on prenatal light and postpartum and NICU and all these other things. So I think that's definitely helped us big time, because if you just think about it, when the baby's in the womb, that red and near infrared light that you get from the sun is so important. So we definitely focused on the sunlight. We definitely focused on a little bit of photobiomodulation here and there. But like I said, took care of the basics and then let the body do the rest.
Yeah, that's really important. And I'll let Tristan chime in really quickly. I was just thinking, because when I think about my birth a lot, and I know when you work with clients, for instance, you sort of like to hear about their early life. Did they have lots of infections? Were they natural birth? Were they C-section? All these sort of interesting things that sort of add up to certain mitochondrial damage later in life or sets them up for certain things. And I think about the fact that when my mom was pregnant with me, for instance, she had gestational diabetes with both me and my brother. And I think about why. And I think about what could this set me up for? What things do I need to think about? And so it just makes me think, like, what could we focus on? I think you said it perfectly. It's basically the basics. It's like fundamentally what do humans need to thrive, focus on mitigation of the things that are in an environment that are not beneficial, and then trying to maximize those other things. But I'll let Tristan jump in here because I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, you're good. I think what you said is really important for people, because it's not about like perfection. Like, it's actually impossible. It's never going to happen in a modern world. And that goes with health, like, in general. It's just about, really just trying to do the best that you can given your situation. And, that could be leaps and bounds of improvement compared to if you don't be deliberate, if you're not deliberate about kind of your actions and what you're putting forth. So, I think it's really cool to see that there's a lot of folks now really focusing in on what they can do to optimize their environment for the next generation. And I think it's really important, because if we don't do this, it's going to be a disaster, because we're only now seeing the effects of all these things, and the next generation or the younger generation, it's only going to get worse, because now you think of all these kids who are just exposed to all these toxins at a really early age, instead of like we're all the same age pretty much here. So we didn't get cell phones, like smartphones, until high school, maybe first cell phones late middle school. When we were like 8 years old, we didn't really do anything on technology. I mean, yeah, artificial light was a thing, but it wasn't that pervasive. And now it's just happening earlier and earlier. So imagine that generation where they're getting phones when they're 4 or 5 years old, iPads, then they're going to grow up and they're going to have children. Their children are going to be screwed. Like it's just really, really bad. And I'm fearful of it, but it's cool to see that folks like yourself are taking these actionable steps to go about it. And yeah, I guess the thing maybe to ask is, you probably, the diet perspective is really always harped on so much, like Ryan said. So it's cool to see you kind of talking about light more. And I know from the diet perspective, it's really easy just to eat like real food. Weston A. Price is really popular. They have a whole kind of diet specific, I think, for pregnant nursing women. So yeah, what was your kind of biggest inspiration, or were there things you tweaked along the way that maybe didn't feel right, or kind of felt like they needed to be more of a focus area maybe? And did you treat different stages of the pregnancy like different? Because I know between trimesters, obviously your fiance is feeling a ton different. So was there different steps that you took, or different modalities that you implemented as well?
In terms of changes, definitely, taking direction from my midwife in terms of adding the beef liver pills, even getting like a methylated form of vitamin B12, a whole B complex that's methylated. Those were important things for us, especially because both of us have an MTHFR gene mutation, and we can get into the efficacy of that and whether you can actually fix that just with light alone. Because I know Cruz and some other people have talked about that. But outside of that, I think, by the way, keep this in mind, to the whole perfection point, we found out about the pregnancy 5 months into the pregnancy. So we weren't even aware of a lot of the things that we were doing because we just didn't know. And so that goes to show how important mindset is. Because if we did know and we were basically being neurotic about it, how would that impact the health of the baby? And, Enzo's the healthiest baby boy that I've come across, that I've ever seen, to be honest. I even have friends who like have 8-month-old babies, but they're not even holding the same weight as an almost 2-month-old baby. So, in terms of other changes, I would say definitely limiting ultrasound was a big part of, was a big red pill for me, because before our midwife, I had no idea that was even a thing. And people can refer to, I believe it's the 50 Human Studies by Jim West. I think that's the book that really puts forth the research on how detrimental ultrasound can be. And outside of that, what else?
Well, that one's a cool one. I want to dive into that a little bit, because that's something I went through when my sister had a baby 2 years ago. My nephew is 2 years old, and it's the same thing. Wait until they're 2. Wait until Enzo is 2. He's going to be like leaps and bounds ahead of everyone. And it's going to blow your mind. Like my nephew is bigger than all 2-year-olds, like bigger than 3-4-year-olds can talk. 4-year-olds, some 4-year-olds literally can't talk now. And this is like rural Wyoming too. This isn't even in a city. But the ultrasounds was something that really blew my mind, because when my sister was pregnant, they wanted her to come in like, it was like every 3 weeks to get an ultrasound. And my mom was like, no fucking way you're doing that. That's, first off, it's such a waste of money. Obviously, they had to drive, because it's Wyoming, like an hour each way to do this. So yeah, my sister definitely, I don't know if she read into some of the studies you're mentioning, but you can fill the audience in. But that was something that really blew my mind. And I realized that this is totally just a way to make more money off of pregnant women, is to like say how ultrasounds need to be this regular to come in. And I didn't even think about from the EMF, from the artificial light, the stress, that whole perspective has to be like really detrimental to the health of the child and the mother.
Dude, and by the way, the FDA, I believe, if I have this stat correct, because I did come across this, they stopped researching the effects of ultrasound on a human fetus in 1993. So from 1993 to 2023, we've limited the amount of research that we've dug into this. And also, like, they've also increased the threshold of the power of ultrasound by like 8 to 10 times ever since that point. So
Wow. Wild.
You have to ask yourself, like, what kind of incentive structure has been created to allow for that in the first place? Because most people think of ultrasound, they just think, oh, well, harmless sound waves. What could happen to my baby or my fetus? And I was like,
I didn't even ever think about that. But yeah, it's between 2 and 12 megahertz. And obviously, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty high power machine. And just, the hospital, usually those situations, like those areas they're EMF like bombs. I mean, I don't know how you want to say. It's just like there's so much high powered equipment plugged in all the time. And then, yeah, it's proximity. You're right on the stomach. So did you guys do none, or did you limit them to just like one at the end, or how did you go about doing that?
I think in total we did 3. I remember, we did 3 specifically, but we definitely limited it. We also, this is an important thing to consider. Just because the technician understands that ultrasounds might potentially cause harm doesn't mean they know how to actually use ultrasound as well. So you have to make sure that you have a very educated and conscious technician, because it's all about how you handle the actual machine. You can't just leave the ultrasound stick or whatever Doppler you want to call it on the fetus or on the womb for long periods of time. You have to make sure that she goes over it and then releases it off every single time she's not actually looking at the graph or whatever it is. But this is something I still have to educate myself on. I still haven't read 50 studies by Jim West or whatever his name is. So it's something that I can't really speak on too in depth.
Well, I got a study that was sent to me by a friend that came out literally like a month ago, and it's a review on EMF exposure and abortion and pregnant women. And basically the conclusion showed that EMF exposure had a significant effect on miscarriage rates. And it showed that, those who were exposed to high levels of EMF had a very increased risk of miscarriage. And this is a comprehensive meta-analysis. So it's not, and it was everything from, cell phone radiation, probably to incorporating, I would imagine, ultrasounds to some degree, but I'll have to read that as well, because it's everything we're talking about. Here's a paper that shows something that probably makes logical sense. You're just stressing out the body. You're giving it the wrong input signals. So I'll have to send this to you guys. I'm going to post about it eventually, but
that'd be awesome.
It just blew my mind. And that fact that there's actually people researching this. I mean, they're definitely not from the US or getting funding from the NIH, but it's wild.
Just another thing that centralized medicine has failed with. I mean, it's absolutely absurd, because it's hard for me to actually find 1 or 2 things that centralized medicine is flawless in. I mean, surgery, maybe.
Broken bones and...
but it's few and far between. Everything else, there's some second, third, fourth order consequence, or it's just outright dangerous.
Yeah, and it's just how it goes. Like, just talking to some researchers recently and about studying things that have no profit product. They get no funding. And this is actually one of the biggest issues with research, and then people like Lane Norton, these guys that need a double-blind placebo study to prove anything. It's like, well, they're not being funded to study these things because there's no benefit from an ROI perspective to tell people to go outside, eat real food, and avoid, EMFs. But I guess maybe getting into more specifics of towards the end of your pregnancy, you had a plan, and then I think it went like maybe a little not according to your plan, but it still worked out, obviously fantastic. So maybe walk us through that and what you learned from that experience, because it was I appreciated your perspective on when you do actually need to use the centralized healthcare system and not be, kind of ignorant to the fact that this could probably save your life potentially.
Yeah, which, by the way, is a great indicator of an awesome midwife. If you have a midwife who just completely shuns centralized medicine in hospitals, I would be weary. I wouldn't necessarily go with them because there are going to be edge cases. There are going to be times where an emergency does pop up and you do have to go to the hospital. So that's something to look out for those expecting parents out there. Yeah. So we went, we went about the whole typical midwife stuff. So during the actual birth process, I mean, we stayed at home for maybe 7 to 10 hours. My fiance was going through contractions normally. She progressed, I think, to about 4 or 5 centimeters dilated. I'm not sure how much, but anyways, eventually we got up to a point where she was noticing that the pain was a little bit too intense. Our doula came at like 4:30 in the morning. She helped me. She helped my fiance, and then over the course of a few hours, my midwife ended up coming towards the latter end of the experience. And she does her whole fancy testing. She has her intuition. She goes through the whole 9 yards, and eventually she noticed that something was seriously wrong. She hypothesized she could feel that it was potentially an infection. And this began to make sense in my mind because her water broke before she even went into labor. And that dramatically raises the risk of infection if that happens. So, we had to do an emergency transport to the hospital, went to the hospital, even though my midwife, and by the way, this is CHOC. This is one of the best hospitals out there, and they have a more progressive approach to birth, believe it or not. But it still took them 2 hours to actually get an epidural and antibiotics into her after she got into the hospital. So I think that's one of the potential negatives, even at one of the best hospitals available, because they're just not on the ball as much as they need to be, especially with something like sepsis, which is what my fiance ended up having. And just went about that process. It was definitely nerve-wracking, as I think it was one of the more important experiences in my life because, you just don't know what the outcome is going to be, especially with an infection, labor, a whole bunch of this other stuff. But I think there was a serious problem with how the first doctor and the first set of nurses approached us because they essentially just kept trying to push us into an emergency C-section without trying to actually explain what was going on. Like, it's one thing for you to tell expecting parents in labor that, you have sepsis, infection, baby's at risk. But it's another thing to actually sit down with them and go, A through Z and really explain what the risk is. And so we waited for a shift change. We waited for a new doctor to come in. And thankfully, the new doctor did exactly that. He explained everything from A to Z. And from that perspective, it made sense for us to go into a C-section because that's not what we wanted. We wanted a natural birth. And if we were able to push for that, then we would have done that. But I'm very grateful for that experience. And I think it really showed us the full spectrum of not only home birth, but centralized medicine. So we got to see the entire thing at play, really.
That's actually a really interesting experience. I mean, I have that same sort of issue whenever I go to a doctor, even within functional medicine, where there's this lack of explanation to the patient that really sort of irks me, because I feel like even the average Joe Jim out there, it has a yearning to understand why something is happening to them or why they're being told XYZ to do. And it doesn't seem to happen as a commonplace act, especially when you go to the normal, general practitioner, or even in some functional medicine settings where you're given certain supplements or whatever, and they don't really tell you, okay, what each of these things are for. So I'm glad that you guys push for that, because I think it is important to understand the breadth of a situation, no matter what that situation is, especially when it concerns your health and the severity of an outcome like that. I mean, you want to know everything. And I think it's important to want to know and make the best decision without just being pressured. And I've found that to be a lot of cases in sort of those emergency settings. I've gone to the emergency room several times, not necessarily for myself, but with somebody else. And it's sort of like a panic state in there. Yeah. And there's like lots of confusion and don't really know what's happening. And I've had situations where they'd go for the completely wrong thing. And then you just get like put on stuff that did nothing and probably actually made your overall health situation worse long-term, because they just shoved a bunch of stuff into you out of like panic and no dictation. It's really crazy. So I'd actually love to, we kind of talked about this earlier, but in sort of your mind, and it's a big question, obviously, but how would you model these situations better? How could we make, how would a more decentralized way be beneficial for patients? I think just being able to explain situations better would be mega beneficial. And I think it would ease the tension, because you don't want that stress, especially the mother's already in distress. You don't want that then going into, the child is trying to be born, because all that reads off each other.
Yeah. By the way, sorry for the attack helicopters above me. Of course, right when
You're good.
Going off.
You're good. Jose can clip the sound, so it's beautiful. Editing is where the magic happens, is what I've always been told.
Absolutely. But yeah, you're on the ball. Education has to be the first and foremost step. I really do believe that doctors should be the most educated out there, not only from a centralized perspective, but from a decentralized perspective. And it is a very tough question, because it essentially means that you have to uproot the entire centralized paradigm in order for a more beneficial process to happen in the first place. So what I would really say is, going through that experience has opened my eyes and really allowed me to develop more empathy for everyday people who don't know this stuff within health. Like, if I was the average normie and I had no idea of artificial light or non-native EMF or, some experimental gene therapy that they want you to take and some other stuff over here, I would, well, first of all, I don't know if I would necessarily feel helpless, because I would still be ignorant. So I don't know what I don't know. But once even as somebody who's as educated as I am, going into that situation, I was like, my adrenaline was pumping. I was on high alert. I was nervous. So it wasn't the best situation that I would have loved to be in. But I honestly don't see it being changed in the foreseeable future. And that's the really scary thing, because like I said, it's going to require a complete paradigm shift. And I just don't see that happening unless something drastic happens, to be honest.
Yeah, it's really scary. And what's cool about your story is, like, you did so many things, like, optimal for your situation, and then things didn't go according to plan. You had to make some compromises, but you're still raising the child in a very optimal environment. So obviously things are going to be fantastic for you and your family, but then everyone else, they're doing suboptimal things, like literally the entire time. The birthing process, suboptimal, and then everything after is as well. So it's like across the board. Whereas if you have, maybe one tiny little moment, it's not perfect, but it's still, optimal from a holistic perspective. And yeah, it's wild. And I don't know the statistics, but around just how things have changed in the past few decades. But I just know from the ultrasound perspective, my mom, when she was pregnant, she said they maybe had 2-3 ultrasounds. That was what was recommended. And now it's, 9 or 10. And then something else I know, and something I want to get your opinion on, because I haven't asked my sister about this, because it's kind of a weird subject, is just vaccinations in general. So that's, and you don't have to answer this if you don't feel comfortable.
Ripped it out of my mouth, Tristan.
Man, I feel so comfortable. I want to attack it.
Yeah, because from my understanding, just the amount that's recommended in the first, and I don't know the scheduling, the first year, the first 2 years is like 3 to 10x. You hear RFK talking about all these things, autism, heavy metal exposure is through the roof. So maybe, what did you experience in this? Is this something that happens like right after birth, or is it more, the following 6 months where they're like, come in and get your 45 shots? And what's your stance?
Yeah, so this is something they will push for if you do go to a hospital. They won't. So most of the jabs, I kind of want to hesitate from using the other word, because I know you guys are probably going to post this on YouTube, right?
It is true.
Yeah. So yeah, jab.
I don't know how much I want to spend on it, but
jabs,
anyways,
stabs, scabs.
Most of them are going to be recommended after the baby is born. But once you start going to the doctor for the normal routine checkups, like 2 months in, 3 months in, all the way up till age or 18 months in, something along those lines. What they will really push for, at least most hospitals, I think all of them, is number one, the Hep B vaccine, so hepatitis B. which made no sense to me off the bat, because you only really get that if A, the mother tests positive for it, B, you share needles in the drug context, or C, you engage in homosexual behavior. Like those are the only three ways that you get that.
And this is right off the bat. So this is like right when you have birth. They have a list of things that they want you to get.
So they essentially want you to get the Hep B vaccine, synthetic vitamin K, and then the eye ointment. Those are the three things that I've come across. But yeah, like I said, I mean, first of all, almost every mother out there tests negative for Hep B because they're just not doing that stuff. They're not sharing needles. Hepatitis A is something that we rarely find in the States. And once, so again, it's like this intervention on steroids, what they call, what people in the home midwifery industry call the cascade of intervention. They'll recommend one thing, and then that'll lead to another and another and another, and eventually you're absolutely fucked.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly. I was stuck on mute there. It seems, because like you're saying, you're in this kind of like stressed out environment, and then it's like it seems so easy. Like everyone is so ripe for the taking to just be like, the doctor or whoever is recommending these things, which, like you just said, they make no sense in the context. But so many people just, they have no idea about anything. They're not well researched like you are. And then it's a very stressful situation that you're in. So they're just like, oh yeah, sure. Okay. And then
exactly.
That's it. So it's really, to me, it's taking advantage of people in a situation like that. It's just unacceptable. So that's great to hear that you kind of like had that understanding right away. And
by the way, what I find insidious, for lack of a better word, is that the nurses weren't talking up the Hep B vaccine because of all these potential health dangers. All they said was that, yeah, your kid won't be able to go to public school or be admitted to daycare. And I'm like, why do I want my kid to go into this anyways? Like,
darn.
Yeah. But I think for a lot of normal people, that's like a big deal because
it is,
and it's actually a great way to quote indoctrinate a situation, because you can't go to community college without XYZ, jab, because you have to have it to go to school. And so if you don't have that mindset of like, oh, there's all this world out here that I could pursue that doesn't involve any of that, you feel like you're stuck. And that's sort of the mindset shift you have to break. Plus, I think, like you said, Tristan, you're in that heat of the moment where you just had your child, mother's extremely tired, dad's probably extremely tired. I know my dad was after 36 hours of dealing with that stuff with me. That you just kind of like, yeah, let's just do whatever so we can get out of here and go home and enjoy maybe one night's rest before it starts getting rough again. But yeah, it's crazy. And I think the more that you sort of go down the rabbit hole, like you said, with the Hep B, the more backwards everything makes no sense. There's no logical.
They just back you up against the wall, right? Let's say the same thing with the COVID jabs, right? They just like forced everyone. They forced universities and employers and across the board. So if your back's up against the wall, like you're going to have to make a decision, right? So that's why being, more of a sovereign individual and decentralized is really important, because then you don't have to compromise on things you don't want to. But I guess, Zaid, I can let you chime in there, but I want to hear more about how things have been going since and the regular checkups as well. So that's probably even worse from pushing you onto these things.
Are you interested in 100% grass-fed, grass-finished bison meat? I'm excited to be a partner with Falls Family Ranches. Based in Wyoming, Falls Family Ranches is raising high-quality bison meat the way nature intended. As a native large ruminant of North America, bison is one of the most nutrient-dense foods you can consume. If you're interested in trying out their bison boxes, use code Tristan, Tristan, 10 for 10% off your first order.
And I'll be very clear here. I'll share my stance on the jabs in general. I think most of them, if not all of them, they offer more damaging risk than they do benefit. And this is the level to which I took it. So once I started going down this rabbit hole, I went through every single package insert for these jabs. Every single one. I looked at the side effects, potential side effects. I looked at the research that they offered. And really, none of it adds up for me. None of it adds up, especially when you look into like polio, for example. There are 3 types of polio. The most severe paralytic form of polio, you have about a 0.5 to like 2% chance of even contracting. If you even get that form of polio, you have a 50% chance of recovering from it. And the overall risk to reward ratio, I mean, we're talking about probabilistic thinking. Like, I do value that. Like, let's look at the numbers. For a lot of these things, we're talking about like 0.014% chance of even getting this stuff in the first place. So, we don't have to dive too deep into it, but that's essentially where I stand on that.
Well, and then they're filled with like aluminum, which is a known neurotoxin, right? So
or mercury or something.
Well, yeah, I think they switch.
The flu shot too. They still recommend the flu shot multiple times a year.
Yeah.
And that thing still has thimerosal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And last thing I'll say on that too is like when you start reading into this stuff, it sort of becomes obvious that none of this makes a lot of sense. And it's so funny because like you said, very data-driven stuff right here. It's all out there. And they'll use that same logic with why you need it. So I think it's just really funny how people turn numbers around and how they come up with numbers for various
what is this called?
Solutions that they want to sell.
Physicians for
but
informed
anyway,
consent.
that's the last thing I'll say on that. We can talk about the more happy stuff.
If you guys want to educate yourself, especially for any new potential parents out there, watch the YouTube videos from the Physicians for Informed Consent. It will blow your mind.
Yeah, well, like, have you gone to checkups, anything, and has it been uncomfortable, like, speaking with the doctor about these things, or have you just been kind of completely on your own since the birth?
We've been more decentralized in our mindset, so we haven't gone to any conventional pediatricians, conventional doctors. We've mostly relied on the midwife the first 6 weeks, the midwife checkups. Everything has looked fantastic so far. Jaundice has gone away faster than expected, especially compared to normal babies. We actually went from that physician for informed consent, we went to a Dr. Bob Sears, and he takes a more decentralized approach, let's say, because he offers an alternative jab schedule, but he also offers no jabs at all. So we went to him. He did his regular checkup, but really we're just more so focused on the midwife. I think on Wednesday is our last checkup with them. And from there, like, there's really no need to go to any centralized establishment because we have everything in check, and he's a healthy baby boy. So,
yeah. And he's how old now? 3 months?
7. He just turned 7 weeks on Sunday.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Wow, flying by already.
I mean, Enzo's he's almost 13 pounds.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So that's really cool to see. Is there anything special that you're doing because of the C-section? Because this is something that, again, it's probably not an ideal choice for a lot of people, but some people love it in mainstream. They're like,
I literally have a cousin. I have a cousin who loves it. Loves it.
They're like, dang, it's easy. I don't even I'm walking the next day, like no problem. But obviously, you do get a little, I believe, less microbiota exposure. So is there some things you're doing to help accelerate repopulation from the microbiome perspective?
Honestly, just sticking with
the usual.
Exclusively breastfed. I think, a mother's milk is some of the most powerful stuff out there, especially when you get into immunity and that whole rabbit hole. But yeah, exclusively breastfed. I never understood why people want to go for C-section straight off the bat, because it is a much longer recovery time. And it is a little bit more brutal in terms of how that recovery process is. So we've mainly just been focusing on great sleep. She's getting sunlight in the morning, getting as much vitamin D3 as possible from the sun. Photobiomodulation is key on top of that. So we're doing that exclusively as well. Beef liver pills. I think beef liver pills from the moment you find out about the birth, even before you try to conceive, all the way up till, really until the day you die, I think is a great idea, with some exception for people who struggle from iron overload and that stuff. Mm-hmm. What else? That's pretty, dude, basics account for most of it, to be honest.
That's really cool. Yeah, it's exciting. I guess in general, how is the care or how have you thought about things like in general from raising your child, like how things are going to progress from, you're not going to do daycare, you're not going to do any of these things. Are you fully committed to homeschooling or unschooling and kind of going about that the best way possible?
Yeah, I mean, that was something I thought about in depth, especially with the public school system, because I went through the whole, ever since like kindergarten through 8th grade, I went to a private school, religious private school, and then I transitioned to a public high school. So there's a part of me that does believe that blood is king, that eventually, like, whatever you throw at the kid, they're going to figure it out and become more sovereign and decentralized in their philosophy. But I don't want to put them through that. So I think we're going to end up going through homeschool. It's on me as the man to make enough money and to provide and protect as much as possible to be able to have that opportunity. But I think we'll figure it out. It's certainly going to be better than the curriculum that they offer in a in a public school.
Oh yeah. My boss actually took all their kids this last year out of public school and started homeschooling them entirely, which is like, I think it's really cool. Sounds a little bit stressful with 3 kids at once, but I'm sure in the end it'll be more optimal, especially for them, and especially from like a critical thinking perspective. I mean, we want our kids to be, critical thinkers and be able to, discern for themselves and not rely on like going to a title to tell them what truth is. So that I think you're doing a real service. How have you treated things like with some of the basics and stuff like that? Because I don't know, I've heard various things. I'm hardly the parental expert, but especially around like sun exposure, where I had a discussion with my cousin recently I swear she has a baby every year now. But she has 5 children now. And she was like religiously trying to keep her child out of the sun for like protecting their skin and stuff like that. And in my mind, I was like, I just don't think that's the right perspective to take, especially from like the infrared light and all that stuff, and just keeping them inside like a little box all day. And then on top of that, buying their 2-year-old an iPad. I'm just like, you're just like completely ruining their melanin, their neuromelanin, all this stuff. So how have you guys been like approaching sunlight with your son?
Yeah, so we've been maximizing AM sunlight. I'm a huge proponent of early AM and late PM sunlight, just because of the filigran production, the fact that you're not getting that harsher UVA, UVB. You're getting mostly a red light spectrum in there. And I think that's the most important thing to really build the solar callus that people don't take into account. Because like I'm dosing him with higher UVA and UVB sunlight, but since babies absorb more light than adults, like I'm more focused on 5 to 10 minutes at the most. But that AM sunlight, I mean, I could push it for 10, 20, 25 minutes max is usually what I'm comfortable with right now. But I find that dangerous, to say the least, to not put your newborn or infant child out under the sun for a limited period of time, because you're essentially just keeping them inside, and the average person has artificial light on 24/7.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I've observed, I don't have too many children in my life. My girlfriend has quite a few nieces, and so I've sort of been around them more and observed them, and they're pretty rarely like outside. I remember growing up like being constantly outside, and each one of them has like their own iPad, and I just find the concept so insane. I mean, the youngest one's 2. And just drags this thing around and is like super addicted to it. And we were having a conversation with her brother the other day earlier today. And she was like, yeah, I got to like limit her time on the screen because she'll just play Roblox for 6 hours. And I'm like, yeah, I'm glad you're seeing that, because that's not for the reasons I'm seeing it, but it's still good. Like, let's rip that thing away. Cause I really think about, I mean, the brain's everything's so underdeveloped, especially in the beginning, to just slap them into it immediately. And I think about in a school setting too, there's a lot of push. My mom's a 1st grade teacher. There's a huge push for, I forget what they call it, but it's like on-screen learning. So like half the day you're in front of the teacher, half the day you're on a screen. Each kid has like an iPad or a laptop. And they're even doing this in high schools, where a local high school near where my folks live is completely half digital. So like half of their day is completely on computers, just like this, like we're doing right now, for like 4 hours straight, just every single day of the school year. And I'm just thinking in the back of my head, like their brains aren't developed till 25. Like they're just completely, for lack of a better word, cucking themselves. Like,
well, you have to think about it from just the size perspective, right? Like if you have a cell phone up to your ear, for us, even if we have it up to our ear, it's only going to penetrate maybe like 30% in or 40%, where if their skull is half the size, it's going to be going like all the way through. And then they have that extremely high water content, which is where the EMF destruction is taking place in terms of electromagnetic interference. So, yeah, I guess my question is, Zaid, how have you thought? Obviously, if Enzo's only 7 weeks, you got some time there, of course, but this probably changed your whole paradigm on how you're gonna raise your children and everything. Is there any big steps you think you're gonna take in the future, like moving to a certain area, like moving off grid, trying to avoid technology until a certain age, say 10 years old, they can start using a computer but no handhelds, or how have you thought about kind of that longer term picture? Because obviously in a populated area where things are kind of unavoidable, and then it's hard to balance education of tools. Like obviously technology is a tool that's very beneficial, but then the detriment is so high. I mean, I don't even know my stance on this, so maybe we can have a little conversation, because
I love that.
It's so tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly have not thought about it too in depth, just because it's been, the past 7 weeks has been kind of overwhelming. But honestly, I think less is better. At the end of the day, the kid's not going to touch. He's certainly not going to have a phone by the time he's like over 10, I think, in my opinion. I mean, if he's being homeschooled too, let's say we do hypothetically homeschool him, where is he going to go where he needs a cell phone in the first place? I mean, he's a child. And you can even make the argument against that. Maybe he has to go to a friend's house or something like that. But I think less is better. Even now, I'm taking steps to make sure that, distance is key for non-native EMFs, all this other stuff, airplane mode, being outside as much as we can. But I think, I'm great. I was born in 97. So I'm grateful to have had that experience, a taste of no technology growing up.
We were the end. We were the end of that. The tail end.
We were the end of that. So, I want to try to replicate that for him. And really, I do think children are more intelligent than we believe, are a little bit wiser than we believe, and they pick things up quickly. So if I'm able to teach that in a non-pushy way, a non-pushy sense, then, he'll be hip to it, and he'll be really, really into it. So I think I'm hopeful for the future.
I think you're right. I think you're right, man. It's lead by example. I'm trying to red pill these little kids. They don't know it. I'm going to get them one day or another. I'm going to get them in the woods alone.
Well, you do have to have that right that right balance, because otherwise they're just going to be revolting against your direction, and then just going to figure out how to do these things on their own somehow, in a way. But
I think about it this way too. It's like when we're talking about, like, I know a lot of parental defense, and I hear this a lot because my mom's a teacher, so she deals with parents, as she puts it, deals with parents. But one thing that they'll talk about is, like, she'll have kids that are in first grade come to school with an iPhone 13, and it's just like ridiculous. And it's like, in any realm of history, did we need an iPhone 13 for safety or whatever at 6 years old? I didn't have one. I was running around in my friend's house all over town. And I went home when the lights came on in the streets. And that's how it was. And that's how my parents grew up. And really, it's just sort of referring back to that wisdom. Because I think that's a defense I hear a lot is, they'll be safer if they have this around, and they're running around with it. And I'm like, well, how did you guys do it without that thing? Because
people tell me that too when I tell them to turn their phone off, and they're, what if there's an emergency?
Every day I hear
what
it.
do you mean? Like, the odds of that are so low, and that's just life. You don't need to be reachable 24/7.
I mean, like, God forbid, listen, school shootings have been rising in the US. God forbid something like that happens with any of our children. But the idea that a phone is going to protect them in a scenario like that is stupid. It's not going to do anything. You'll be able to call me. And then outside of that, you're at the mercy of God, to be honest, because a phone is just a way of communication. It's not going to protect you in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a funny discussion. That's funny, Tristan, you bring that up, because I've had people tell me that thing. And I said, if someone dies and they're trying to reach me and tell me my grandpa died, passed away, I'll still find out in the morning. And the only difference is I'll have slept better and I'll be better equipped to handle it and not be cranky. So
yeah, I mean, this like reachability thing is a completely new phenomenon. I mean, before, someone could have called your landline. Then before that, it was just like writing letters. So
write a letter.
You wouldn't find out for weeks anyway. So how about LA, man? I guess we talked to Case. Case seemed to be like wanting to get out of LA. Is this something you've been thinking about? And you don't have to have an answer, because it's probably, it's a big question, but I'm curious for all these health-centric folks that we're friends with.
So I understand why Case wants to get out of LA, because every time I go to LA, it's a shit show. It's terrible to raise a child, in my opinion. I'm in Orange County, so I'm like, I'm about 45 minutes to an hour away from LA, and this is more of the conservative, tightly knit area. There's still a lot of people, but Orange County is a nice area because I find it to be the balance between you have some space and you're able to do a lot of these things without absolutely being bombarded in a densely populated city. So I see myself and our family staying here for the foreseeable future. That's not to say I'm not open to moving to a more natural setting, because I do think I want that. So maybe Colorado, Utah, Montana, somewhere along those lines. But for now, we're gonna stay here, and we're just gonna bolster up the basics. Just make sure that the melanin's on point, the food's on point, light environment, everything, like you name it. We just want to get down the fundamentals, really.
Yeah, I mean, you have a higher sun and you got the beach as well. So I think, it's a great area, right? It just happens to be, if you do live in LA or these areas, it is, you get all the good, more of the good and more of the bad. So I guess it's just balancing that. And if you're deliberate about it, it's still a great place to live.
Yeah, I really like OC, actually. My aunt lives down there. I actually always loved escaping LA to come visit her when I lived there for a few years. It was great to go down on the weekends and go to the beach. You could practically walk to it from where she was at. So it was such a good release to be able to do that. So I definitely agree. I mean, if you want to come to Utah, you got friends. If you want to go to Wyoming, Tristan will be there. So
Absolutely.
I'm less cowboy rancher though than Tristan. Tristan's more like on the horse. I imagine it with the flannels and the jeans and the spurs. I'm more like sort of my boss always calls me like a desert hippie, because I'm like walking around with like sandals and like shorts and like my cotton hat and stuff. And yeah, that's kind of sort of my vibe. But I would love to ask you this sort of basic question, but kind of a fun one, is how has being a dad changed you in a way that you didn't expect? Or how is being a dad for the first time?
It's definitely made me more mature, because the level of responsibility that I have to take on now is exponentially higher than anything where even when I was single. I mean, like, even when I was in a relationship with, just being boyfriend, girlfriend, like that was easy mode. That was life on easy mode. And life does get harder when you do have a newborn, you have an infant, you have more responsibility. But I think that accelerates personal development in a broader sense, because then you get to see the finer things in life. You get to think about legacy. You get to think about how you want to impact your child in the most beneficial way. And I think that's overall a better thing for society, especially when it comes to the nuclear family units, and the fact that has largely been destroyed ever since however long. And so I think, just the more responsibility, the better, especially for men. And now my role is to really make a splash in the health world and have more of an impact there, to then translate into my family life.
I think that's beautiful. And I think it's important, because I think community and having a tight-knit family is really important. It's something that I've always been thankful for having. And I never really realized it until the last couple of years, where I've really been diving into this stuff, realizing how important that familial unit is to just your health and just longevity. I've been thinking about how I think about my grandparents differently than I ever did before, and like trying to keep them in the fold. And I think that it's something that in predominantly here in America, I see you have sort of a nuclear group, and then you have your grandparent group, and then as you have kids, that sort of disappears. You lose that generational stuff, and then you kind of form your own units that aren't connected. And I really hope that people like us can sort of bring that back together and keep the family unit, close. Because I do think it's important for longevity and all those things. So that's super cool, man. I'm happy for you. I'm excited.
Yeah. And these kids are going to need all the help that they can get. This world is going to need all the help that it can get. So to really raise sharp, young, sovereign, decentralized people, that's huge in my opinion. I think we need that more than anything.
100%. Tristan, you got anything, or feeling pretty good?
Yeah, I guess, maybe we could just talk a little 15 to 20 minutes about things that you're researching, you're excited about. How has your paradigm shifted in terms of what's most important? How have you incorporated any new habits into your daily lifestyle besides just more sun exposure?
I'd love to ask one thing, actually. Or maybe
we get into how you've managed, like, obviously you're waking up probably often with your newborn. How is that? How do you manage the optimal health lifestyle? Because something that my sister told me is that people, if you have a healthier child, that actually sleep better, and then you don't have to wake up as much. And it's kind of over dramatized on how horrible it is, but obviously that might be indicative of the health, but you're still going to compromise some sleep quality. So maybe we tie that together and then transition out.
That'd be good.
Sure. So in combination with the AM, PM, vitamin D3, UVA, UVB, sunlight, I think the biggest change by far that I've made is installing bond charge, low EMF, low flicker bulbs into the room and into the house more so at large. So because that just automatically makes sure, exactly, that just covers you on the blockage of artificial light, protects circadian rhythm, circadian biology. And it's very important, especially for newborns, because it takes a couple of months for their circadian rhythm to fully develop. But the funny thing is that if you implement certain strategies that we're talking about, that can accelerate. So instead of 4 or 5 months, that circadian rhythm can kick in at 2 months. And we're starting to notice that because Enzo has he's asleep by like 8:30, like clockwork. He takes a couple naps during the day. He wakes up around, at this point, he goes like 6-7 hour stretches of sleep uninterrupted, which is great. But the beginning part was definitely tougher because I had to wake up 7, 8, 9 times. And in terms of the optimization, I tracked it with my Oura Ring. I was still able to get great sleep just because of the whole light environment and the fact that was kept in check. So I do think that if you're approaching a newborn and an infant from the conventional lifestyle, then it's going to be a lot harder. If they're infant formula fed, then they're going to be much more fussier. If they're under artificial light, then the same thing applies. So I do think a lot of this comes from lifestyle. But ever since, I'm still able to get great sleep. My fiance is able to get great sleep. I just think it's more fragmented. So you could even make an argument that it's more evolutionary consistent. Because, when did we sleep for 8 hours uninterrupted, right?
Yeah, probably not often, to be honest. That's something I think about, too, especially in the summer. If you got, 10 hour or, it's light for 15 hours, then, I don't think we were sleeping for more than 6 hours, probably. As well.
Yeah.
It'd just be wasted opportunity. But in the winter, probably sleep a little bit more. But that's really cool. It goes to show with everything. I think, everything is normal, but it's not normal. It's common. That's the difference.
That's big.
This is what's common. It's not normal. Like PMS and just waking up every hour and a half for your baby or just having these symptoms, like they're not normal, they're common because of the poor health of society. And it just shows you right there, like that's an indicator that, the health of your child is pretty optimal. So that would just get me so excited as well. I feel like it must be really exciting for you as well. You have this wow, I have this blank slate to really like give
Mold
this
'em.
child the best health possible with all the knowledge I have. You know, it's kind of like taking everything that you would have done to yourself if you had known everything, but then you get to do it from day one. So
It's
I
so
can't think of
empowering.
it more exciting thing.
Man, I mean, empowerment is the word that comes to mind, because if I knew this stuff as a kid, I would become even a bigger unit. And the fact that like I want to create Enzo into a force of nature. So it's going to be very fun to see. I'll be honest, just the fact that he didn't get any jabs and his light environment's in check, that to me means the world.
That's 99 percentile right
pinnacle.
there. Immediately. And then you add in the food quality and breastfeeding, and it's like, it's not that hard, people. Come on.
No
It's actually very
aluminum or
simple.
mercury toxicity for us.
How long what's optimal like breastfeeding length?
Oh,
In terms of
Years.
like the meta perspective, or like
Yeah.
an individual feeding.
Just like the meta perspective, just like it's like years, isn't it? It's like as long as you can, pretty much.
As long as you can, pretty much. But I don't understand why people have this stigma of like a 4 or 5 year old breastfeeding. I really don't.
Yeah.
I
it's
think
kinda
it's more. Actually, I have no idea. Like I can't even.
Well, I just asked because I run into like two types of people. It's like the people. Well, one, they either do none at all, and then there's the ones that do it like 5 years or something wild, and then there's the ones that do it like 4 to 6 months. It seems to be like
so
the three types
from
of people.
my experience, I think it's around 2 to 3 years is like common, because there's some biological things you could check to where it'll naturally, your milk production will naturally go down unless you have another child. So really, that's where it kind of becomes like,
Weird.
if you have a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, but you also have a 1-year-old, then you could breastfeed them both. But I mean, my sister stopped after a year and a half. She just became too taxing. But I think like 2-3 years. I'm not an expert here, of course, but
I would
that's
say,
my understanding.
Yeah, I would say minimum 6. I mean, certainly minimum 6 months if you're exclusively breastfeeding, which I definitely suggest. But maybe around a year to a year and a half is a good, like, higher minimum to aim for.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it's just going to depend on your situation as well. Like, you know, it can become really uncomfortable. You could get just complications, but yeah, it's kind of case by case. But I would say 5 years is probably ridiculous.
Yeah, I see some of those on Instagram, and I'm like, wow,
start eating meat.
going to elementary school.
I guess what I find more ridiculous is like the aversion to breastfeeding in public. Like people get so offended by that. I'm like, this is the most beautiful natural part of human biology and nature. Like, why would you be so hung up on this?
Yeah, no, that's true. You know, one thing I always think about when I think about you, Zaid, is in our last conversation, we talked about detox a lot, and how detox is like you were saying, more important than food. And I agree to like quite a bit of an extent. I think some of those kind of play together. But now it's sort of like, my question to you is like, where do you stand with redox compared to detox? Where's the line of importance for you now? Many months later, I guess.
Well, I think I definitely think redox is just as important, if not more important, than detox. You know, in my understanding of detoxification specifically has evolved, especially considering the fact that I've done a deep dive on melanin. I mean, just the fact that melanin can hold on to and adsorb heavy metal ions. I mean, I think that's incredible. The fact that drugs and certain substances can bind and accumulate to melanin, like that's crazy in my mind. So I do think, actually, you know what? I really haven't, like, how would you define redox? Because I haven't done I haven't looked into redox specifically to understand the technical definition. So how would you define it, first of all?
Probably push it to Tristan on that one. He'll probably give a way better definition than me.
Yeah, well, that's the problem when you oversimplify things. To me, redox homeostasis is really just talking about like mitochondrial health. And I mean, redox homeostasis is managing redox reactions. So you could get into reactive oxygen species, the reduction and oxidation of electrons at a high level, how well that's occurring. So that's going to be different for every person, right? Like for me in Wyoming in the winter, like that's going to look different than you in California in the summer, depending on haplotype, melanin, skin
But that's
type,
what's so cool.
and
That's what's
season.
so cool about it.
So, but in general, and I've noticed that here, like I came to Australia and actually, yeah, the UV was so high. I noticed actually if I don't eat a ton of carbs, like in the morning, and I spend like hours in the sun, a couple days, I got a massive headache. And that's because my redox is not strong enough, or I'm not really built strong enough and that's probably because I went right from fall Wyoming to UV of 12, 13. I didn't have this gradual buildup. So that's where the redox was not strong enough. So obviously things like carbohydrates can help with that because they're just providing more electron inputs quickly, and upregulating complex 1. But yeah, at a high level, it's just reduction, oxidation, reactions in your body. And most people's are very bad because they're exposed to all these toxins and that are generating more free radicals, stealing electrons, and not having that proper flow of electrons in the electron transport chain and the proton buildup in the matrix.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because for me, all I was going to say really quick was that to me, it's not so much the idea of like what is the order of importance as much as what is the context of all of these things put together. Because if you look at like some of the things like you were saying that melanin does, in some ways that is helping with detox, especially when it comes to like heavy metals and certain things like that. And actually the nicotine thing binding to melanin, I think that was like a crazy thing that I read a while ago. But if you think about it, it's less about the importance and order of operation. I mean, it is, but it's more about how do they all work together. And it's not looking at each picture individually. That I think that was sort of the trick question I was trying to ask you was it's not looking at them as separate entities as far as like, where does this play a role in all of the things that matter? Because that's what I've come to realize is that it's like working on all the things together. Now you maybe attack certain things in a different order or at a different severity, but at the fundamental level, all these things are happening to create, mitochondrial health. So you kind of need to have all of them. But
it's laying the foundation, really, to be honest. I mean, the problem with the detox community is like, if you just detoxify all this shit, you're going to feel better, but you're not you're not addressing the foundation of the issues. And then, you get into like exclusion zone and things of, what's keeping toxins out of your cell. Those don't exist without proper redox as well. But yeah, I guess I know you're researching more of the detox stuff in general. Like what did you come upon, Zaid, that you think is really effective, maybe besides melanin or what's the conclusion of thought there? Because this isn't a rabbit hole that I've really gone down a ton, to be honest, either. Well, there's a ton of heavy metal exposures, things like that we still are facing on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the simple principles at the end of the day. If you can build up enough melanin, if you can sweat consistently, especially from active movements, so from training in hotter environments, because I've actually seen research to show that active dynamic movement while sweating is more effective than just sitting in a sauna, stationary. Yeah. And this makes sense when you start to think about the lymphatic system and how comprehensive that is. And outside of that, just making sure that you maintain a healthy lifestyle. So avoiding municipal tap water, making all the arrangements in terms of your lifestyle, getting all the toxic care products out of the way. It really does come to that because the body will take care of everything else. And I think, you are right, Ryan, because it's not about comparing the two. It's more so about getting to the foundational level of reality, and which is why I'm more interested in quantum biology now. Like that's really the deep dive that I'm going on. And, especially when you study the relationship between water, melanin, light, like that stuff it's so mind boggling. But if you can understand it from a simple perspective, then it really does, like, you are addicted to trying to understand it even more. And for me, that's really the territory that I'm diving into now.
Yeah, and I think it's like you don't even need to go down this detox rabbit hole, really, because if you give, like you're saying, step one, if you remove more of the toxins and then you prioritize the lifestyle habits, you're actually going to give your body the chance to naturally, like your body knows how to detoxify. Your body knows how to perform cell cleanup and repair and, cause or program cells to commit suicide because they're damaged. So that's what you need, but you can't do that if you don't have proper circadian rhythm and melatonin production and getting that quality sleep, which is something you've been, that's been your number one priority for years now. And it's just under discussed. It's like these fancy, protocols, sure, they can be helpful, but if you just give your body the opportunity to do it itself, and if you have the right energy, like coming to, melanin and redox to do these tasks, and, you're not eating 45 times a day and right before bed and whatever, you're going to be fine. And light as well. Light is an energy source that your body needs to perform these tasks. So, but the sauna stuff, cool, sweating, getting that out, it's all really helpful. But, there is some stuff as well that it just gets even more scary is when, you hear about these forever chemicals and other things that you can't get out of your system, or it's a bit more complex, and it's hard to really form a protocol around that. But I think just doing the foundational things and then avoiding exposures is probably the best we can do at this point. I would say but you can become neurotic about it very easily just because of how many toxins there are, and it's sad.
And that's the thing too, is like one of the things that I find really interesting now that we're having this discussion, we're all sort of been talking about this bigger picture, is I'll give an example of sort of the mold community and the way that we view, like, mold's a very hot toxin right now in the space. And one of the issues, or one of the markers that'll come back for a Sears test, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, is low alpha MSH. Well, what is alpha MSH responsible for, right? It goes back to the light story. So I just did a little Jack Cruz thing there. You notice that with the light story? Anyway, but it does. And so it's like this whole picture that I think we need to really stop looking at it as like this one thing for each problem, and really look at it on a more high level, because I always bring people up to this point of view where it's like many people have lived in mold, predominantly like South America, where it's more humid, don't have the problems that we have up here with mold, seemingly. Why is that? Their redox is probably way better, stuff like that. And so for me, when I think about it now on a much higher level, it's like, if you're not working on some of those principles on top of maybe some of the detox principles with mold or whatever you're dealing with, then you're not actually going to get the health you're seeking, because you may get it out of you, but what's to prevent it from ever making it an issue again? You're not giving yourself the building block to be mitochondrially like resilient. So you need to have the full picture to actually get what you want out of it. It's not just about getting it out. It's about preventing it from messing you up again down the line. And so that's where you see people like Michaela Peterson or whoever who had these issues. They're still kind of stuck on that one paradigm, and they moved to a whole new location, moved to Arizona to be away from humidity and be away from the mold and all this stuff. And like, yeah, that's probably like a good right now solution, but we're not looking at the big picture, because you shouldn't have to worry about that. And so it comes full circle, but super interesting. I get very heated about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I get heated in regards to a lot of this stuff. I think really my main focus now is bringing, POMC, pro-opiomelanocortin, and all the cleaved peptides associated with it. Like, that stuff is mind blowing to me. So really what I want to do is I'm going to start working with clients in person, by partnering with a company that I've worked for part-time for quite a bit of time now. And I want to introduce the whole light story to these people, because that's really what I think can move the needle, because frankly, they're just completely blissfully unaware of it. So if I can start to introduce light environment with the understanding of POMC, alpha MSH, beta MSH, all that stuff, and create a comprehensive system and then deliver it in person for people who have no idea on this stuff, I think that can really start to, it can start more of a grassroots perspective. So that's very exciting for me.
Yeah, and I love the stuff that you're sharing along the way. I think that's one of the best things about following people like yourself or Tristan over here. Probably not me on Twitter, because I'm just kind of messing around and like reading a bunch of stuff. But it's cool that it's fun to watch people learn and share the information they're learning as they're doing it. They're like living the example. And I think that's the best thing ever, is just seeing people grow over time. And that's why I wanted to talk to you again, because you've had so much growth and experience change in just the short amount of months since we spoke last. So it's a fun conversation. But rounding out, where can people reach out to you, find you, follow you? Got great threads. You got a great podcast. And I'll drop all those in the show notes as well. I will say, listen to episode 1, then come here because you'll see the changes. And I think it's really cool.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram at Zaid K Dahhaj. You guys will have it linked, so no need to spell it. The 2AM podcast is a big thing for us. We're going to start producing more content for that. I've been covering more health topics. I think we're definitely going to cover light exclusively on an episode, maybe some other things as well, but that's basically where you can find me.
Cool beans. Well, I appreciate everyone joining us for a whirlwind episode of Decentralized Radio, and I'll catch you all in the next one.